Hello everyone, welcome to the South Asia webinar series jointly sponsored by the Leadership, Learning and Innovation Group and the Public-Private Partnerships Group of the World Bank. Sorry for this little delay and the technical hitch. I'm joining today from Moscow. I'm Shyamala Shukla. I work as Senior Consultant with the World Bank Group Public-Private Partnerships. And as I was saying, this is the fourth webinar in the series, and today we will discuss Pakistan's PPP program with a focus on the evolution, successes and failures of the program at the national government and in the province of Sindh. We will also look somewhat at what lies ahead for Pakistan given what has gone behind. And today our speakers are Mushtaba Shanil, who is joining us from Toronto, and Ejaz Ahmad, my colleague from the World Bank Group Public-Private Partnerships, who's joining us from Washington, D.C. To introduce both our distinguished speakers today, Ejaz has over 20 years of experience in various core areas in PPP across different regions. He has in-depth experience of Pakistan, which includes his work initially as program advisor in the Privatization Commission of Pakistan, chairman and CEO of Pangaea Growth Limited, a Pakistan-based consultancy advising in South Asia and the Middle East, as well as the CEO, this is very important in his experience, of the Infrastructure Project Development Facility in Pakistan, which was set up to play a very major role in Pakistan's PPP program. Mujtaba, on the other hand, has rich experience at the provincial government level, having worked as Director General of the PPP unit in Sindh. He's an expert in transaction structuring and financial modeling with experience in multiple client-facing projects, both locally and globally. He has also worked as an investment banker in Canada and Saudi Arabia. So we have two speakers today with very rich experience and background in Pakistan, and we will hear from them about their experience, what they feel, and their prognosis for what lies ahead. Mujtaba, Ejaz, a very warm welcome to both of you. We will begin our discussion with a brief introduction to by Mujtaba and the evolution of its PPP program. And then Ejaz will take over. He'll talk about the national government, which he knows very well, about the IPDF and the general program at the national level. And as you know, Punjab and Sindh provinces followed up with the setting up of their own PPP units once the IPDF was set up. And over the years, we have seen quite a lot of PPPs at the provincial level. And Mujtaba will take over from Ejaz and talk about what's been happening at the provincial level. And we'll see a comparative kind of analysis of how both governments have been working and what are the successes and failures and what is important in a PPP program to make it successful. Mujtaba, over to you.
Hello, everybody. This is Mushtaba Shanil, and I will give you a brief overview of what Pakistan as a country stands economically and in terms of development, and what are the opportunities ahead. Uh, in this slide, what we are talking about is the way Pakistan stands as a country. Like if you look at it, it is right in the middle of the region where we have on the right hand side we have the countries which are growing, known globally as the growth hub of the world right now. While on the you go on Pakistan's left and we have the energy hub of the world. So Pakistan lies at a very strategic location where it can be work as a trade corridor for the entire region. Similarly, if you look at the GDP breakup of Pakistan, the services sector overshadows all the rest of the sector. And if you dig a bit deeper, we understand that the banking sector and the advisory or the service sector in Pakistan are very robust. So the kind of background that a PPP requires, that is there. While if you look at the key stats, the literacy rate is quite low. It's just 60%. And if you again dig a bit deeper, 60% doesn't mean that everybody in that 60% will be able to read and write clearly. It's a bit made up number. On the other hand, if you look at the GDP per capita, it's around $1,400 per capita. And based on that experience, you keep this number and compare it with other regional powers or the developed world. This is very low. And when you're doing a PPP, this number takes a lot of weight. The reason being that people don't really have the willingness to pay toll or tariffs. And when we were doing projects in Pakistan, Initially, people were very happy that we are doing a project or something is coming up. But once the project was there, they were not very willing to pay the toll. Even in the willingness to pay service, it was a very interesting study. So this was a brief background of Pakistan. For you, the population is around 200 million, which is, if you look in terms of globally, is quite huge, and it gives you the critical mass. As we go to the next slide, that also demonstrates that. Like for example, the biggest city in Pakistan is Karachi, and the population of Karachi is around 25 million, which is huge. So it has a critical mass. You can do a transportation project over there, and it will give the critical mass, even though the people are not going to pay a very high tariff for what they are getting, but you will have the critical mass. So the economies of scale are always going to be there. This slides talk about the same thing. That there are a lot of natural resources over there, so that can be harnessed for good power projects. There is a well-developed regulatory environment, and there is a young population as well. So to cater to that population, the main thing is that you have to give them the infrastructure so that the private sector and the youth can develop on from there, so that Pakistan becomes a sustainable country. And now we will talk about the infrastructure bottlenecks that are there prevalent in the system. Right now, on average, there is a 5,000 megawatt shortfall in the system when we talk about the power supply. Uh, and if you look at the whole country, at the moment when they talk about the current requirement of the system, it's around 20,000 megawatt. And if there is shortfall of 5,000, that's 25% reduction in the overall demand. So there is a huge shortfall, and cities like Lahore, Islamabad face up to 12 hours of load shedding daily, which is like negatively affecting the GDP like anything. The estimates that I was going through was that every year 3% of the GDP is wasted just because of the power shortage, which is a huge thing. And when we talk about the power shortage, it's not just because of the generation capacity, that Pakistan doesn't have the generation capacity. The capacity is largely there, but it's either has to do with the generation mix. They are too reliant on RFO, which is not too bad at the moment because oil prices has just suddenly gone down. But if you look in the long run, when the oil prices were really high, the tariff was really high, and then we go back to the willingness to pay for the masses, and they weren't able to pay their bills, so there were leakages. That's why we have the 30 and 35% line losses, which is again huge. If you go across the border to Iran, the line losses are around 4%, 4 to 5%. While you enter Pakistan, there I know there was a district where the line losses were as high as 60%. Uh, so that is a major infrastructure bottleneck. The per capita road per kilometer is really low. It's the lowest in the region. It's lower than India, Sri Lanka, Iran. When I was going through the stats, we come to the transportation. There is no railway based intercity facility all over Pakistan at the moment. Karachi is the largest city in the world with no mass transit facility at the moment, which creates a lot of transportation problems over there. It has the highest percentage of motorcycle in the total traffic in the world. That's around 65% people use motorcycles when they are commuting in the city. Education, the right, like we were talking earlier, that 60% is the literacy rate, which is again the lowest in the region. It's lower than India, it's lower than Sri Lanka, this is lower than Iran. And when we talk about a large youth pool, then we need a lot of education facilities to harness the talent of that youth pool into something which will help the economy instead of hindering it. If you ask my personal opinion, I think the issue of terrorism has a lot to do with how the education institutions have worked in Pakistan, the madrasa culture, how the schools are harnessing the talent. It's a very important part of the whole puzzle in Pakistan's future. And when you talk about the health facilities, the failure to eradicate polio has put travel restrictions on Pakistan, and it has been a huge issue over there. And when you talk about the general facilities, the average level is very low. People who can afford facilities have very good hospitals like Aga Khan or South City Hospital, but when you talk about the masses, they don't really have any place to go where they can be treated well. Uh, so why do we, when we talk about the infrastructure bottlenecks, why do we need the need for PPPs? Generally, whenever I've spoken to people, both inside and outside Pakistan, the main reason that people talk about PPP is lack of resources. That if you are making a road, you can charge toll on that, and that will give an that will pay off the whole project, and then you'll be good to go. Or they don't really have the resources, then they can go towards the PPP. In Pakistan, it might not be completely true. The reason being the willingness, first, the willingness to pay survey. The people are not really willing to pay a lot of tariff, so there will be problems in that. But it does give you a good revenue resource, and coupling that with some government subsidies, projects can be done. But personally, based on my experience, the biggest reason Pakistan really needs PPP is the bureaucratic system. It's the same system that has been going on for the last 100 years. It was put in by the British government when Pakistan was a colony along with India in early 1900s, and the same system is going on. And the bureaucracy is trained in a certain way that they are not a specialist. They are not able to deal with things in a specialized manner. It's very you can say fragile system that you will find one bureaucrat at one place for 2 months, and then he will be gone, and somebody will be in his place for the next 3 months, and then he will be transferred. So we need a system which can is specialize in how to deal with project, how to deal with socioeconomic development of the masses, and keep it a continuous process instead of being transferred from one place to another continuously. So the bureaucratic system is, for me, a more major reason than the lack of resources to do uh, projects. For example, in the Sindh province, when I was working over there, in the last government, they spent something like $10 billion on public sector scheme, which is not a small number, $10 billion. And when I used to ask them, can they show me a single mega project or project which they can talk about as a showcase project, which they were able to do through the public sector, and there wasn't a single project that they can talk about or show that they were able to do that project out of that $10 billion budget. While on the other hand, we were able to do a couple of PPU projects during the same time period, and government didn't spend a lot of money on them. So at the end of the day, it's not only about the money thing. They had $10 billion and they weren't able to deliver because of the capacity of the bureaucracy and the systematic flaws over there. While on the other hand, the PPPs, even though they were utilizing other resources, not the main public sector money, they were able to deliver a few projects. And that's why there is a lot of, you can say, appetite for PPPs in Sindh. This is just a PPP map of Pakistan. At the federal level, we have the Infrastructure Project Development Facilities, which was established in 2006. Ijaz has headed that, and it has been doing a good work. It has been more of an advisory body than a lead agency, and that has to do a lot with the tough issues. Then we have the Punjab province, which has a PPP cell established in 2008. The PPP Act was passed in 2011, but it was amended a lot in 2014. They also have the urban unit, which looks after the PPP project, mainly to do with the projects that are happening in urban centers, mainly Lahore, or a few of them are also in Faisalabad. The province where I worked, Sindh province, it was the PPP unit was established in 2008, but at that time it was just house 1-2 people, and they were starting to do the work. If you ask my opinion, it really picked up in something like 2010, and they had their first the first PPP Act passed from the Sindh Assembly. It was passed unanimously, so there was some ownership of the PPP right from the start. It was passed in 2010. There is not a lot of thinking in KPK or Balochistan about PPPs, but of late, let me share this. This is not official in that sense. Somebody who works in the PPP industry in Pakistan was telling me that KPK government is meeting people regarding how they can do the PPP program, and the Balochistan government. Advisor to the Balochistan government recently contacted me about a month ago, and they are also thinking about starting a PPP project in Balochistan. So there is thinking of PPPs in the other two provinces, although there is nothing on the ground or officially, but they are thinking in terms of doing some PPPs. Over to Ijaz to talk about the federal PPP program in Pakistan.
Thank you. Thanks, Mustafa. Good morning, everyone. As you can see, Mustafa has laid out a very good sort of a country context. You saw that Pakistan has a huge infrastructure backlog, not only in economic infrastructure, but social infrastructure as well. And then we also need to plan properly for future. So it's not just existing backlog. We need to plan for future. Uh, but before I really get into what has been done recently at the federal level, just to give you a brief background of the genesis of private participation in infrastructure as a whole. 1990s were good years for private participation in infrastructure, the post nationalization days and all that. Like many other countries, Pakistan was turning to the private sector. Pakistan had a very good IPP program for power generation in the 1990s. It was considered one of the best, not only in the region but globally. Then Pakistan also had a very good privatization program. Again, a sort of leader in the developing world. Uh, but going forward, what most countries did was they transitioned slowly. Once the big industries were done, banking sector, they transitioned to a public-private partnership kind of arrangements. And most countries transitioned well. Pakistan kind of struggled, even though the privatization legislation we had actually covered the whole spectrum of private participation. So even if you look at the privatization legislation today, it talks about BOTs and concession arrangements, management contracts, and all that. So by 2006, it was very clear that the transition has not happened the way everyone had envisaged. Uh, Not only at the federal level, but I mean the bigger problems were obviously at the provincial level at that time, and then at the local level. And this is the time when Pakistan was also experimenting with devolution. So we had a sort of a newly empowered municipal governments. The role of there was more autonomy being given down to the provinces. So that came with more responsibility in terms of providing infrastructure to their constituents. Uh, Now, when the so there was a clear need for some kind of intervention. And in the very beginning, we had the Asian Development Bank, which came and worked with the federal government at the time. Later, the World Bank joined in, and they said, let's put in, what do we really need right now? So if you look at this diagram, this spider web kind of thing on your screen right now, you don't see, there is no typical PPP unit in the sense that there is a small, unit placed under the Ministry of Finance, which works closely with the budget department or the debt management department, and does the gatekeeping functions. What you do have is something called IPDF, Infrastructure Project Development Facility. IPDF was by default acting like the central PPP unit, but it meant to catalyze and kickstart agencies who should be taking the lead role in public-private partnerships. And in order to do that, he obviously it had to work closely with finance, but it also had to work closely with the planning commission, the sector ministries, and the second and third tier of governments. So what did the government decide? The government decided that, well, we need to have the cloud of Ministry of Finance at the federal level, but also need the efficiency of the private sector in how we manage IPDF in terms of catalyzing its catalyzing role. So it was set up. IPDF was an interesting experiment of setting up IPDF outside the government structures, if in a way that it was set up as a non-profit company. It had a board of directors which was half public and half private, and all of this was done under the umbrella of a task force, which was like a governing council, which had representations from ministries and from provinces, and as well as the federal government. So as you can see from the diagram, it was in the center of facilitating other agencies rather than playing that purely gatekeeping role. Uh, it was, like I said, the privatization legislation allows for public-private partnerships, but at that time, the Privatization Commission was struggling with its own issues, and so this was done sort of outside that legislation, but in close, working relationship with the Ministry of Finance. Now, what the issues that the IPDF supported the Ministry of Finance in doing was, it was helping it manage its own, the exposure that was envisaged from the public-private partnerships. So they said, okay, let's create a risk management unit which is able to assess contingent liabilities and real liabilities and see what projects are affordable, what projects can offer us value for money. So, like Mustafa said, viability gap funding, affordability was recognized as an issue. So IPDF, working with the Ministry of Finance, said, maybe we need to look at how do we subsidize, how do we gap the difference between affordability and cost recovery charges, tariffs. Similarly, there is still a need for long-term local currency financing, and the concept of developing an infrastructure project financing facility also was looked at. Now, these were all issues which were looked at a concept level. They were approved by the task force. They developed their business plans. Viability gap fund went a little further ahead and was also incorporated. But at the end of the day, the government, in its wisdom and rightly so, said, these things have to be demand driven, and we don't want these extra layers set up when there is really no demand. And if we recognize these as issues, but these issues maybe can be dealt with on a case-to-case basis. So unlike, for example, Indonesia, where you had the whole thing set up front, and the idea was once these things are set up, it may encourage more PPP growth and PPP pipeline. In this case, they were left up to the just taken as far as doing business case studies, and at that time it was felt that that there wasn't sufficient demand to go further at that point. On the left side of your screen, you see very clearly that again IPDF wanted the ministries at the federal level to set up their own PPP nodes and take the lead in their own sectors and their own PPP projects. Similarly, the IPDF worked very closely with provincial governments at the time, and I did not have the privilege of working with Mustafa at the time, but definitely his predecessor in helping them in whatever way we could at the time, because we had by that time developed guidelines and standardization documents. We also had a national policy approved by the cabinet, and that policy explicitly also said that we need to we need to play that catalytic role. Similarly, we were in the process of identifying some large metro areas, the big cities with, for example, urban transport needs, solid waste management, and these kind of projects, so we could support those projects. What happened going forward was, to be very honest, at the federal level, like Mustafa alluded to earlier, this whole program did not get much traction. And one of the reasons why it did not get much traction was by the time this program was in place, we were heading towards the end of the political cycle in one government. We had elections. The other government, when took its time to understand what this whole framework meant. They issued another policy in PPPs similar to the last one, but again, there was very little activity in PPPs as well as privatization. and a lot of that had to do with politics, and a lot of that had to do with turf issues, like Mustafa said. But in any case, I think what IPDF realized was that they don't have to be the central PPP unit, they don't have to be the gatekeepers, but they kept supporting institutions like, for example, the National Highway Authority at the federal level, and in the hope that at least they can be in the background, but provide technical support and get some traction into the program. And they, for example, they also had a very good program with Pakistan Railways at the time, and it was they were about to sign four concessions. Again, we came towards the end of another political cycle, and those projects never got signed. So if we look at the, I mean, there are still strengths if somebody wants to pick up the program and would like to run with it today. The ingredients are all there. There is substantial groundwork done. The framework and guidelines are there. There is a draft law, although I don't. It's not the main impediment, but there is a draft law. There is some capacity now developed, and the provinces have definitely taken lead in this area, and I think the federal government can learn a lot from the provincial experiences. Um, and uh, all the things, I think if we can, at this stage, I think we are in a much better position to get a much clearer idea on the pipeline of projects. The but having said that, in my personal opinion, I think what needs to be done is to pick up the lead agencies who are politically committed to PPPs and strengthen them. For example, the National Highway Authority, there's a lot of opportunity over there. There's a lot of opportunity in the seaports area. It would be good to do PVPs with in airports and railways, but there's no political will at this time over there. My personal opinion, also, I think that the role that IPDF was playing as being at the center has also been watered down. I would bring that expertise. I would probably put them under the privatization commission if you had asked me today, and you know, with the backing of a legislation already in place, I would try to revive the program in that manner. Um, this is a summary of, you know, where is, what at the federal level versus provinces. Like Mustafa said, Sindh and Punjab have taken the lead. We at the World Bank have uh, been approached by the governments of Balochistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa as well. And I think they are the bank is encouraging that the successful programs become mentors to other provinces, and so they're trying to create that forum, starting with a conference where this can be brought together and structured in some manner. Um, we've already talked about the experience in the power sector, the federal level. At the federal level again, there's some good experience at the highways authority and the ports. But again, like Mustafa said, there have been tough issues. IPDF never got you know the kind of role that it was supposed to play, and it all goes back to the political will. I mean, if there is no political will, I think we can do these targeted interventions, but really maybe not be able to have that coherent central federal government PPP program. With this, I'm going to hand back to Mustafa, who can talk about an actual successful experience at the provincial level.
Thank you, Jaz. Now we will talk about Sin's experience about in PPPs and how it has evolved over a period of time. Sindh PPP Act was passed in 2010, just as I was uh, telling you at the start. And one thing that I would like to add here is that Asian Development Bank worked very closely with the Sindh PPP unit right from the start, and they are already still working with them. There is a special program for it, which is called Enhancing PPPs, and even in drafting the first act, they were right there throughout the uh, time period. And then there are the guidelines and the rules, just like there is the VGF guideline, there is the PPF guidelines for funding for feasibility and transaction structuring. Then we have one good thing that happened at the Sindh level was that they had a dedicated chapter dealing with PPPs in the Sindh public procurement rules, because procurement of PPPs is a very complicated thing. If you compare it with your normal projects, there is a lot of technical details, the risks, how the risks are going to be shared, and then how the procurement is going to happen, because it's a negotiated process as compared to what happens on the other hand in a traditional project. So they have a dedicated chapter which has helped a lot in pushing the program forward. Then there are the PPP nodes and the PPP unit. If you go by the law, then the PPP nodes are supposed to be the agencies which are going to lead the process forward. And PPP unit has the role of more of an advisor and the facilitator in the whole process. But what has really happened is the PPP unit has been the agency which has pushed the process forward, and it has been the agency which has been lead in a lot of things. Even though quite a few things, the technical details and the procurement is done by the agencies, but the PPP unit does all the legwork, and it even at times pushes the agencies forward to do certain things. This is like the institutional framework. If you go over it, there is a PPP policy board, which is the apex body in terms of approving any project. It is headed by the chief minister, who is the chairman of the board. Then there is the finance minister, who is the vice chairman of the board. And if you go over it, it's a very high-powered board. And when we were drafting the law, it was discussed that if the ownership of the PPPs come right from the top, the chief minister, the finance minister, the chief secretary, and all the relevant bureaucracy, and then there are some private members as well. Then the government is going to take ownership of it. If we will going to make a board which is going to be dominated by the private members, and then the government might not take the ownership. And I think this thing has worked because when the chief minister conducts a meeting, he takes the ownership. The finance minister takes the ownership. Under the PPP policy board, we have the PPP unit, which is the liaison and agency between the transaction advisor, technical advisors, and the departmental PPP nodes. There have been some few nodes formed in different agencies, and just as Ijaz was talking about, that you have to pick and choose which agencies are going to be very aggressive in terms of PPP. We found at the Sindh level, transportation, works and services, which mainly deals with highways, and energy ministry were very aggressive, and then eventually the education and the health ministry also picked up in terms of doing PPP. So this is like the main institution framework of the PPP that we have in front of us. And this is the Sindh pipeline. It's on two slides. The first one is the project that the Sindh PPP unit or the Sindh government has been able to do on the PPP mode. The first project was the Hyderabad Mirpur Khas dual carriageway. It was a landmark project because it was the first PPP in Pakistan in terms of highway. IPPs have been happening for the last 20 years now, but this was the first one that really happened in the road sector with complete guarantees, the minimum revenue guarantees, and a few other supports in the structure as well. It was completed in, I think, 2012, and then it has been running quite efficiently. Doing the financial close for this deal was a great experience because the banks were used to doing the IPPs, but moving on to highway was a very difficult decision for them. Although on the face of it, it should not have been the case, but it happened largely due to the fact that the federal government was delaying the payments to the IPPs. So when I went to them, and if IPPs are governed by the federal government, when I went to the banks, because I was from banking background, and all majority of people over there were very good friends, what they asked me was that when the federal government is delaying the payments, how should we trust the provincial government to make good the minimum revenue guarantees if there is a default? Because you get Sindh is the most independent province. It gets the highest tax. It collects the highest tax by itself in Pakistan. That's around 20-25% right now. And at that time, I think it was around 15%. So it's the most independent province, but still it used to get something like 80%, 85% from the federal government. So if you're not the federal government is not paying us from there, so how you're going to do it? So circle that created a huge part in, I think, uh, negatively affecting the PPP environment in Pakistan, especially in the last 5-6 years. There is the Chekmulla Kathiar bridge project, which is expected to be completed by sometime in couple of months. NICA security and fire safety project. This was completed in 2012. There is an energy project as well, which is expected to be completed sometime next year. There are education management organization in which what the government has done, they have handed over schools to private parties, good NGOs that have the experience of running schools, and the budget that those schools used to get, those will be diverted towards those NGOs or the private parties, and against fulfillment of some certain KPIs. Because you look at the education budget of Sindh, it's not too low if you go per student basis. It's not too bad, but if you look at the kind of quality of education that they are giving to the children, it's not very high. So based on that, we thought that the private sector can do a lot of good in that, because the money is there to a certain extent. It's not a lot of money, but the money is there, but the quality of education wasn't there. So it was a good experience in that term. Karachi Thatta dual carriageway, the concession has been signed, the financial close is in process. Intercity buses and terminals. Actually, in this project, this is a transportation project, running buses between the major towns of the province at a subsidized rate. Some of the buses are already plying on the roads, which were done through the equity of the private party, and they're in the process of doing the financial close now. But partly the project is operational already. There is the BRT yellow line, which the infrastructure part was signed with the Chinese party under a China Exim Bank loan. There is a health management organization. It's very similar to what we did in the education management organization, that hand over the hospital and give them to the private party and then divert the project to them as well against certain KPIs. Because there were hospitals where we have the building, the salaries were being paid, but the doctors weren't there, the staff wasn't there, the medicines weren't there. So why don't we divert all of that to a private party and make them do the work against certain KPIs? And it has been successful as well. And now we will talk about the projects that are in the pipeline. There is the Hyderabad Tendo Mohammed Khan dual carriageway project, which is in transaction and structuring at the moment. There is the Link Road project. There are solar farms. There is then again the bus rapid transit blue line project, bus ops and ITS for BRTS green line. There is the modern grain silos project, which we were doing with the IFC as our advisor, livestock tagging, livestock farm. There are some run of the river small projects as well, because all the provinces have some capacity to do run of the river projects. So Sindh is also doing that. There is a days market project because Khairpur is a district in Sindh which is has the highest states cultivation density in the world. But the output is very low in terms of exports and value creation. So what we are trying to do, we are trying to create a dates market and link it to the economic. There is special economic zone over there where there are certain tax exemptions, especially for agriculture industry. So link those two together and have a hub for dates cultivation. Then there is a mango processing unit. So if you look at it, it started off from typically from the road sector, the energy sector because the IPPs were already there, and then transportation. But then it's had been branching out to health, education, and now there is some focus on agriculture as well because Pakistan has a lot of people linked to the agriculture. I think 67% or 66% of the population is directly linked with the agriculture industry. So now we are moving on to that as well. So it is a very diverse map and it has moved a lot in the last 5 years or so. This is, I will briefly talk about two case studies that we have over here. This is this Hyderabad Meet Khas dual carriage, the first project. concession was a Korean party. They made an local SPV, and then they did the project. The return was 17% Pak rupee. It might look very high internationally, but it wasn't very high in terms of Pakistan, because when the project was happening, the risk-free rate was around 14%. So we thought 17% was a very good equity IRR that we are guaranteeing to the private party. The minimum revenue guarantee wasn't too high as well. It was around 10%. There was an interest swap because the tariff that we are going to get is, we can say that it's going to be this amount is not going to be very volatile, while on the other hand the interest rates in Pakistan are very volatile, and the debt are and subsequently the debt that is raised in the market is also floating. A project cannot go on with a floating rate where it keeps on fluctuating. So what the government said was that the project is going to pay 10% interest rate. All the fluctuations, the government is going to take the upside and downside both of those uh, hits. And then there was this typical coverage of force majeure, political risk, and change in law. One thing very different from the IPPs was that there was not no foreign exchange hedge for the private party, which is essential because the Pakistani rupee is also quite volatile, but the private party didn't ask for it. So we went ahead with it, but that is a big question mark. And eventually, Sindh did introduce a foreign exchange hedging mechanism, which was there in place for 2 to 3 years. I don't it hasn't been renewed, but there was a thing like that, and it's a major issue for the private parties again. The other thing project is we are going to talk about is the Hub Power Company, which was an IPP, and the concession was signed in 1994 in the power policy. 1994, it was a 1200 megawatt RFO based plant. It has been a success steady. The return guaranteed was 15% US dollar based return, which was very high by any means, and they gave hedges for US inflation, currency depreciation both. So IPPs came in, they created a very good environment, and there were quite a few IPPs, but they were a bit expensive. And the government wasn't able to then channel the same energy that they generated from the IPPs into other sectors like road or transportation at that point in time. It has taken almost 15 to 20 years to move toward PTSB, and through different mechanisms. Uh, there were coverage for force majeure and political risks there as well. So this is a typical IPP structure in Pakistan. If you go over any policy, although in the 2002 power policy they removed the US inflation hedge, that was removed, but largely this coverage and return remained the same. In fact, the renewable energy policy, when it came in about 7 years ago, the return was around 17% US dollar based return, which was again very high considering it was around 2007-8 when the markets were going down. They were guaranteeing something like 17%, though it has now gone down to something like 15 and 14% dollar based return. So IPPs, this is a typical IPP structure in Pakistan. Now what we are going to talk about is the PPP issues. What are the issues that the PPPs face in Pakistan? The first is lack of PPP market capacity. There are no standardized agreement and history. Like in the energy sector, we do have some standardized agreement because IPPs have a 20-year history. But when you move towards the road sector, we have started to develop some sort of standardized document, but we are still not there. In annuity-based projects, we are almost there, but in MRC-based projects, I think there is still some work that need to be done. One thing that I really experienced in Pakistan was the consultants weren't able to fully understand what PPPs are. The best, you go to the best law firms, some of them have really grasped what PPPs mean, but you go to the best law firms, even they don't really have the complete understanding of PPPs. You go to the engineering firms, they don't at all have any understanding of PPPs. So you have to work with them. It is a very painful process making them understand PPPs. So as more and more projects happen, I think the market for PPPs will develop as well with passage of time. Then there is a political risk. There is a war on terror, which has, like, Pakistan doesn't have an investment brand because everybody thinks there is a war on terror going on over there, even though there are parts of Pakistan which are very like largely peaceful, but people are not going to take a call on that. Then there is the case of GOP recalling several concessions in the 1994 policy. Even the HUPCO, the company we just talked about, their tariff was recalled in 1997, 1998. So that was a huge issue over there as well. So it was a politically deformed part of government of Pakistan because the government thought that the tariff given to those companies were very high. So they was recalled and renegotiated. Then there is a legal risk as well. Several corporate deals have been struck down by the superior judiciary in Pakistan. There is the steel mill case. There is the JJVL case, which was an IPP at the federal level to import LNG and then produce power. And there have been several other cases as well to do with mining. So everybody, any investor, any even the political government, when they are thinking about concessions or privatization, anything like that, they're always thinking in terms of how the judiciary is going to take a look at that. Uh, then there is the circular debt issue, which is very closely aligned with the political risk thing. The government of Pakistan delayed payments to the independent power producer, and that created the same environment where the banks and even the private investor weren't willing to take a call on the government. And even when the provincial governments went for their PPPs and they had a reasonable history of doing business with banks, the banks asked how you can pay us when the federal government is not able to pay us. Then a major issue, because I'm from the investment banking industry myself, is the lack of developed financial market. The bankers you want to do just plain vanilla structure projects. The longest financing that has happened in Pakistan was of 12 years, which included the 2 years of grace and the 10 years of financing. And it was one was for IPPs and the other one was a restructuring deal. So that was not really green financing where the company was picking up fresh money. It was restructuring a deal. So 12 years is the longest that they have gone. The pension funds or your mutual funds, they don't really get into infrastructure deals, which happens a lot in the developed world. So if pension fund, they should come under some structure. I'm not saying they should just get into each and every deal, but maybe the government can say that this deal is good enough. We will have a term finance certificate coming in for it, and it has these kind of guarantees. And in these corporate bonds, the financial funds can invest. So there can be a mechanism to include them so the market can be widened as well. And then, just as I was talking about, that the interest rates are very volatile. So how to deal with that as well. So these are some major issues that Pakistan has in terms of dealing with PPPs, and I think that was about it. These are the main issues that PPP have in Pakistan. So thank you for listening to us, and over to you for questions.
Thank you, Mustafa, for a very detailed presentation. Thanks, Ejaz, and we'll go over to the questions now immediately. We have 8 minutes of the scheduled time, but we are also extending this time by another 10 minutes because we do have some questions. I will start with one, overarching question which really bothers us all as practitioners. As Ejaz knows very well, we have been working in a number of countries. This is a question from Anand Srivastava. He's asking, in your experience in Pakistan, how useful have PPP acts been? And this is a question for Ejaz, and maybe Mustafa can supplement a little bit once Ejaz has made an attempt to answer it. And Ejaz also answer it in the context of all the African countries where we are working on, frameworks, preparing PPP acts, and spending a lot of time on that. And neighboring India doesn't have an act at all. So looking at the entire context and looking at Pakistan, how useful do you think PPP acts are, and especially focused on Pakistan?
Sure. Again, it's we have a tendency to, when we, like when you go to a restaurant, you want to order the entire menu. So most PPP programs in the very beginning, they want the whole, spectrum of things that, on day one. I mean, they need a law, they need the institutional capacity, institution there, they need, capacitated sort of public sector. It doesn't happen in a day. And I always say I believe in evolution rather than revolution. Get started. There's nothing stopping. In Pakistan, there was nothing stopping PPPs. In fact, like I said, the privatization legislation had provisions for PPP kind of arrangements, but they were never enforced, never used. In fact, then we developed a national PPP policy, and I think that PPP policy was sufficient in the sense that it clearly laid out what the framework is, who the players are, what the decision-making process is going to be, how is the government going to facilitate PPPs. But the draft law was going to be a purely enabling law, and the only reason why we did look into drafting a law at the federal level was to give more legislative power to IPDF in terms of a compliance, because that was a major issue, and it's an issue when you don't have that political will and commitment at the top, and if you don't have that at the top, then you're sort of kind of forced to you kind of force agencies into compliance rather than coming they're coming voluntarily to the table. So I still think that before you and your experience that you gain actually should lead should sort of legislation. Now, I'll give you an example of. So this was the context in Pakistan, but a very similar situation in Ghana, where there was since we have a bank operation over there was a lot of pressure that we need to have the law as soon as possible, and we ended up drafting a beast of 120 pages, which would be really difficult to implement and really understand. But I think it was good that the government deliberately delayed it, because it said, let's learn from experience and then let's feed it back to the law. And what has happened 2 years later is that the law has now shrunk to 60 pages, and the institutional structure, which was not really working earlier, is being revamped, and this new institutional structure is now going to be reflected in the law. So the experience in Sindh is probably different, but that's my personal view.
Anything about Sindh and the experience with the Act?
Yeah, actually, we had a very good experience in terms of having the act on board. Uh, Looking at it in terms of how the contracts play out, you can definitely do a PPP just under the contract act that usually all the countries have. You can just go to the contract act, sign an act contract, and have all the clauses in that. But in the Pakistani text, it was very important because people had lost faith because of the IPP circular debt issue. People had lost faith on the federal government, and even so for private sector it was important to have an act and know, because the IPPs were being done under policies, while if you have an act on board and something and the government goes against it, then it is doing something illegal and you can take it to the court. So in the Sindh context, it was very important to have the law in place, and on top of that, for bureaucrats it was very tough to understand something which was new and to adapt to that change. So what happened was that when we had the law in place, the bureaucrats knew that they had the coverage, they can do all these things under the law, it is allowed under the law, so they were much more comfortable as compared to just telling them that you can do it under the contract law which was passed something like 40 years ago. uh, so they would not have been as comfortable under that. So I think PPP Act was a very important thing that in the Sindh context.
Okay, thank you so much. I'll now skip a few questions and go over to part of the discussion we wanted to have as part of your presentations. In very short, both of you, Ejaz, starting with you and then going on to you, Mushtaba, talk about the future prospects of public-private partnerships in Pakistan. And this is a question asked by Jalaluddin Babar. This was a question which was sent in advance.
Future of PVPs in Pakistan?
Yes.
Again, I think there is no question that there's a huge infrastructure backlog, and going forward, we need to plan properly for our future needs. The estimate is, that you will need four to $5 billion a year on a sustainable basis for the next few decades before you kind of catch up. And we know that, I mean, Pakistan's fiscal situation has improved, but it has a lot of demands on it. So it's the fiscus is the fiscal envelope is really stretched. And I think the most important thing that Mustafa said in his presentation was that it is a funding issue, but more importantly, it is an issue of bringing in the right expertise and the right efficiencies and the right technologies, and to pass on the O&M risk and the whole life costing risk onto the private sector, because the public sector just doesn't have the capacity to do it. Now, I think that the future lies more in, especially at the federal level, in picking up those high fiscal impact projects and having the political will of saying these are now the big five projects that we are going to do. They are high fiscal impact. The whole federal government is going to stand behind it, and we are going to support it in whatever way it's required. Because we always have a tendency to spread ourselves too thin, and sometimes looking for the low-hanging fruits is a good idea. But if they are not high fiscal impact projects, you're not creating that fiscal space. You're not opening it up.
There's another question, Mustafa. I'll hand it over to you. You talked about a lot of sectors, and now the PPP program in Sindh is moving to a lot of other sectors. Anand Rajaram has asked a related question. Why is the public sector involved in mango processing, which should be a purely private activity? So in, doing PPPs, are we looking at, or is the government of Sindh looking at sectors carefully, or is it, going into areas where the private sector alone could also, work? So
Actually,
looking at Rajaram's
yeah.
question, Anand Rajaram's question, please try to answer.
Actually, just as I was telling you at the start, in Sindh, what has happened is that the government was spending a lot of money. $10 billion is a lot of money, but it wasn't able to deliver anything. While if you come to the PPP front, without spending a lot of money, the government was able to deliver a few projects. So because expertise is there at the PPP unit, and the PPP nodes are also coming up, because I completely agree with what Ijaz was just saying a few minutes ago, that it's has a lot to do with the ability to do projects, ability to understand risk, and the PPP unit has developed that capacity very quickly, because we hired people from the best investment banks, from the best engineering companies, from the best law firms. We went on like headhunting to get best people in there, and we got the best people in there. So now they're able to deliver. So one reason is that the PPPs are able to deliver. Talking in terms of, especially for mango processing units, on the face of it, it might look like just a private sector initiative, but usually it has something. When you look at the project, it comes has some government link to it. European Union just put some restrictions on India's mango export, because there were the fruit fly infestation and a few other things in there. So, and they warned Pakistan about it. So the government, and mango, rice, these things are one of the prime exports of Pakistan, and especially Sindh, where the Mirpur Khalid district is very well known for its mangoes and all that. So because the private sector wasn't putting that up, so we are not going to like fund the whole thing and give them all sort of guarantees. What the government said, maybe the private sector doesn't understand what the warning means, and when the restrictions will come in, then they are going to make a hue and cry all about it. So why don't we move in, tell them, okay, in Mirpur Khas we have this land available. We want you to develop these mango processing and facilities, so that we don't have the fruit fly infection and other things in there. So we have the land available in the same district where you have all that. So we have the logistics there. We were going to give you free land or on a subsidized rate. You put up this facility. So we were basically drawing in the attention of the industry towards that issue, and giving them subsidized land so that they do the project, because in the long run it is very important for the trade balance of Pakistan that the exports keep on increasing. So we are like seeing into the future, and we feel that agriculture is a very important part, and nobody is paying any attention to it. And it has happened to India, which is very similar to in Pakistan in terms of agriculture, how it is done and all that. So why don't we now learn from them and put up the mango processing facilities by supporting the private sector. So that was the whole idea behind the project.
Pramod Kokil, probably both of you can try to answer it together. Aja, starting with you. He says, I noticed one unsolicited PPP project. How does Pakistan deal with these unsolicited PPPs? Is there a methodology? How are they doing it? Do they have this at all in their law?
Sure. I can talk about what policy is at the federal level. At the federal level, what was happening, what we observed was that unsolicited proposals were sort of filling the gap, the capacity gap of the government. So when the private sector, saw that, there's just not enough robust pipeline of projects, they became a little more proactive, and obviously there were some elements in there with vested interest. So the policy is it allows for unsolicited proposals, only proposals, not unsolicited bids. And once the unsolicited proposals are received, and I think this is the emerging global practice now. Once you receive the proposals, then they have to follow a similar path as solicited proposals. So they have to meet the same standards of feasibility analysis and viability analysis. Once that established, the policy says that these projects will be put into a competitive process. So there is no sort of a sole source award in that sense, and there is a more sort of a trend towards saying, let's go through the process, and maybe if the original proponent is not the one who wins, let's have a best and final offer process, but there's no consensus on really how to give extra bonus or advantage to the original proponent. Shanil, Mustafa, I don't know what
Thank you.
the policy is at the Sindh.
In that, and what it's exactly what you're telling, that once we get the proposal, we evaluate that, and if we are going to implement that, we go into a bidding process, and we don't and then we give the private party which has submitted the proposal 5% extra marks because it came up with the idea. But we again have to go into a bidding process. But it is a very difficult, I think it is the most difficult topic to deal with in the PPP procurements cycle, to deal with an unsolicited proposal, because usually the private party fights with you why you're going into a bidding process, and they don't really understand it, that the government has to do that. Then we show them the clauses, and it helps a lot that we have a specific chapter on PPPs that deals with it. So it's largely what you have said, and we have dedicated clauses on that, so that helps a lot as well.
Mustafa, we have several other questions, but unfortunately our time is ending, even the extended 10 minutes that we have. So we will have to end it here, and please keep sending your questions. You have some of our emails, I think, on the PowerPoint, and we'll be happy to answer it later. And also don't forget to join our next webinar on May 19th. We will have Anand and a private sector participant from India. We will be talking about the PPP procurement issues there. And before we close, one last half a minute to you, Ejaz. What key message would you like today's audience to take away from the experience in Pakistan at the national level? And very quickly.
Very quickly, I think you've heard me repeat this many times. I will go back to political will at the highest levels. And that's been, unless you have that at the federal level, most of what can talk about the provincial level, but what we saw was that, we couldn't get traction unless there was full commitment from the highest levels. And when I say the highest levels, I mean highest levels, highest political levels, and the highest bureaucratic levels. So we need to get that in place, otherwise we'll keep struggling.
away from Sindh's program and Sindh's experience?
Things were very important in the success of the Sindh program. Number one, the political ownership, it was very important. Just a small example, I was asked to relocate the PPP unit outside the finance department, I think maybe 3, 4 times, and we were given the best offers in the private sector and all that. But I never wanted to go out of finance ministry, because then you would have lost the ownership that we had of the political leadership and the bureaucracy. So I remained there, and even though we didn't have as good as office that a lot of people used to have, but we stayed there. So political ownership, completely agree with Ijaz. Other important thing, to bring in the best human resource, because if you have the best human resource in there, your PPP unit and the PPP nodes, then they are going to develop the guidelines, the law, deal with the transaction advisor, are they doing the right job or not, and then do the projects and keep everybody on board in there as well. So these are two very important things that I feel were part of the puzzle over there. Then, of course, the third thing was that the government is able to understand the PPPs, and you have the multilateral support as well. That was very important in our case, because ADB was there throughout the time period. So the government used to listen to them. They used to advise us in a very coherent manner. They had the experience of Kazakhstan, they had the experience of India, they had the experience of Japan. So all that came in with that. So all these three things combined us to give us a very good platform to do PPPs.
Ijaz, thanks Mushtaba. It was a pleasure having you with us today. The recording for this webinar will be made available within 24 hours. Please do come back. If you missed anything, please do check. Please send us an email. And there will be a short survey right after you see the screen go off. There's another screen that will come on. Please do answer these questions and help us to make this webinar series even better. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining.